Hello. Thanks everyone for coming to this very chilly afternoon here at SFPC. And thank you Ezra and Sam and Charles and Taeyoon. Super excited to spend some time today with Anastasia and with Victoria and with all of you to talk about all of this stuff up here on this table. It's an amazing site. Yes, very excited about this. So I am going to try to be very efficiently brief, but I am known to not be efficiently brief, so I'm going to rely on Ezra to give me the shepherd's crook in order to stop me from talking aimlessly so that I have time to talk to you and to answer your questions and so that we can have a nice conversation. So without further ado, I think I will go right in here a little bit. I kind of reorganized my notes a lot since I started this process, and I decided actually right before this performance lecture, presentation, symposium, demonstration, that I would kind of maybe wing it all together and maybe stay off the slides and go right into what you're seeing on the table for me. So I think I'm going to just start by showing this slide because it's always the place I start my presentations because it's important to think of me as a human with a human life and human experiences. One of which is being this little munchkin over here on the right in front of this. This is a very nice visual thing happening. That's me learning a dulcimer, a lap dulcimer. Let me play some music here to accompany that. Okay, so I'm learning the lap dulcimer. My entire musical milieu is Appalachian folk music from my mother, who played banjo and fiddle. That's not my mother. This is actually my sister Kathy and my sister Jenny. The three girls in my family were adopted. Two from Korea, one First Nations Canadian. We were adopted by a white dairy farming family in New Jersey. So I can play a dulcimer, I can play electronics, and I can milk a cow. Very important. Okay, so where do I listen from? Just keep that in your mind because it'll become important in the rest of the So I'm going to start here with just a little manifesto that I have been working on for the last month or so. I believe that sound alters how we experience and organize the world. I believe that sound can change who we are. I believe that sounding is a way of being. I believe that sounding comes with responsibility. And I believe that sound carries knowledge. So that's the little manifesto to get started here. I would say that the primary feature, as you might imagine from this kind of point in which I started to sound in the world, is that this is kind of an unusual childhood. So there's a certain kind of social dissonance that is just a part of the way that I grew up, sonically and physically and racially. And a lot of that has factored into just the way that I move through the world. I would describe my biggest impact from childhood as a way of approaching situations very contextually, very relationally, and very physically. Like my body is always in context and in relation with what is often a very unique environment where I don't exactly fit. Where actually I feel like I fit, it's just everybody else thinks I don't fit. So I mean, I was super happy, I fit. It was like, yes, I'm playing my dulcimer, I'm very happy. So a lot of times it's just about that relationship between the self feeling very much at home and just, children feel at home in whatever they're doing, mixed with the environment and whether they feel, whatever they feel you are in relation to. So speaking of tutor, I will start with this most enjoyable quote that I use from him quite often, where he talks about what I consider to be his intimacy with his technology, where he speaks to a certain kind of personal and close relationship with technology and with a certain kind of reflexive autonomy that he gives his instruments to himself, and a certain amazing way he had of thinking about how you could be sort of engaged or entangled with technology from the perspective of being curious and interested and imaginative about what the instrument itself might reveal. All right, so let's get into this situation over here. So I think I'm just going to go right into describing this setup a little bit. And by describing the setup, I will segue into all the things that I think are actually kind of important parts of my creative and musical craft. So what I'm doing here, I'll do a little quick kind of demo. I'm using delay pedals. They're mostly Boss delays, DD3s, DD5s, DD6s. Partially because they're very hardy and they really can take a beating. And I mostly practice my music by just continually like reworking the circuit in a way that it does not want to be reconfigured. So it has to have a pretty strong kind of like integrity in the circuit board to handle the kinds of like kind of reconfiguring that I'm trying to do with it. So the first thing I do is I put in the 9-volt battery. The 9-volt battery is not without consequence. The battery drains, of course, the minute you start using it, and the draining battery actually changes the sound quality of the instrument. So the more the battery goes down, the less electron excitement is happening, the sound shifts. So the battery is always like a nice reminder to me that the instrument is always slightly beyond my control, which is important. So always think about, or rather it's important to me to think about an instrument relationship where you allow the technology to speak to you in certain ways that are slightly beyond your control. So then I feedback, input to output, which might be like the best metaphor ever for most things that artists want to do in life. They want to like feedback, they want to like jam the circuit, they want to create an create an intervention, they want to think about input to output, mixed signal. It's also a handy metaphor for a woman, I find. But anyway, so I circuit bend by, and we'll see if this actually works because sometimes the battery shorts. So I circuit bend by actually touching this instrument cable, which is just a regular old 1/4-inch instrument cable. I add an extra little funny probe, stylus almost, to the top so that I can touch parts of the circuit in a very precise way. The language gets very intimate. I'm sure some of you who work with technology have experienced this. The more you talk about your instruments, very much like Tudor spoke to, things start to get very intimate. Like you're touching and you're probing and you're exploring and you're having conversations with the topography. And I find that to be really true, and I find it a very useful way for me to think about my technology from the standpoint of intimacy. All right, so I'm going to see what this pedal has to say today. Intermingle with it or entangle with it, and it goes another way with me, while still trying to go its own way. So like it still clearly finds the delay and loop, but my fingers are now touching the circuit, which is then reconfiguring where the electrical signal is going. And then that really fresh battery that I just put in is making it really happy. I was saying earlier, the pedals are like vampires. You put a fresh battery in there and they just have tons of things to say, and they're just like sucking up that battery and they're super excited. Okay, so that's that pedal. I'm going to move on to another one. This friend, who I am actually using, this is another DD3. Actually, this is another fun, like, you can see all the different generations of circuit boards. These are both DD3s, but they have very different boards. The technology for integrated circuits changes quite a bit. So they're all different instruments, even though they're all the same model. This guy I've been using as an actual delay, but I still bend it. So I still have the feedback loop, but I actually allow this to be open and this going to the mixer so that you can, so it's going to attempt to function just like a regular delay pedal, but then I get the extra benefit of having actual like loops that I can then intercede with this way. Another DD3. This is a similar circuit board actually. Again, this is actually closer to that instrument, but I've been working with this pedal for like a decade. So at this point, the pedal has a completely different, it has different abilities. It doesn't actually function at all like a regular pedal. I couldn't use this as a regular guitar pedal anymore. But certain areas of the board have maintained a sonic integrity. See if I can extract something from this. This is the one that's kind of short down now. This is the unfortunate byproduct of wear and tear here. See when the red light goes on, then you know it's working. Okay, so here we go. This is that integrated circuit. The big square with the, I think you can probably see it here, this part of the DD3 that is actually the most reliable area of these pedals that I found. It actually most reliably produces the same sound, which is usually this lovely clicking kind of pitch. Sometimes also it gives me last one, another DD3. This one's very special apparently. This is the last of the Japanese-made Boss DD3s. The rest of them were made in China. And it has, I think it's like all the DD3s backing have different colors to tell you which generation they are. So this one I believe is the blue one, and when I bought it half off at, when I bought this one half off at the Guitar Center, you may know that place. My special place. Okay, so when I bought this at Guitar Center, he was very excited and he was like, "Ooh, you've got the last of the red, blue-backed Boss delay pedals." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. I'm just gonna open it up and break it." But it does actually sound different, considerably different from all of these, and you can see it's actually like. I mean, you can see the board design, there's no big visible IC, and it's like completely different from this generation, so maybe it's kind of in a similar family. But anyway, this is a really awesome pedal, and as far as bending it, it's actually makes really wonderful, it's kind of like, gives me a lot of like static, but it gives me like really rich, kind of like complicated static and clicking, and there's a little bit of this. Very much responds a lot to very minute changes in your finger, which is sort of like, for some electronic musicians and definitely for me, like in my dream state, you have static and then you can move it with your body, and that is kind of the, to me, that's like the brass ring of electronics, is this concept that if you were in a static field, you could actually like move it with your body. So that's always somehow what I've been interested in moving towards, the ability to kind of have an embodied experience of static. So this is a pedal that actually kind of has a little bit of that. So movement as simple as changing how much pressure my fingertips make, start to alter the sound of the white noise, basically shifting it, shifting the amplitude. Okay. So those are the 4 pedals that I brought today. Does anybody have any questions about that? They actually are all DD3s. You would have thought. But they are all different varieties.
Which one's your favorite?
The favorite, of course, is the new one, the Japanese-made DD3, because it's still. I mean, it used to be that this one with the big IC was really where it was at, because I loved playing the ridges of this chip, but it just makes really amazing like sounds, and they're always more or less there for me. So there's something here. I'm using the intimacy language again. The sounds are always more or less there for me, so I can rely on them when I want to put down a real clicky beat in the middle of my set. But yeah, this one's my favorite now because it's my static field. And also it does some other things. It just depends. This is still a little temperamental. Okay, so part of the way I even understood these instruments was that I improvised quite a bit. And actually my entire musical approach has been largely from collaborative improvisation. That would have started collaboratively with other people, but I would say most importantly started collaboratively with the instrument. So here's this thing, somebody told me like, oh, you can make a feedback and then you can figure out what kinds of sounds it could make. And the first thing, of course, is how do you figure out the sounds of a sort of unknown object or an unknown piece of technology? How do you find the inclination of the instrument, or how do you understand like what could come out of it? When I started, there were people bending, of course, instruments, circuit bending toys and working with pedals, but really like what I was thinking about was I want to figure out how to like have a relationship with these instruments, and how would I do that? And improvisation was sort of the way to do that. So I put this quote up here by Pauline because it really expresses the most effective thing that an improvisational practice offers for me, which is that it completely puts your body into the space of making music. It also puts your body in the space of a social engagement if you're improvising with other people. And then it also puts, most importantly, it puts my body in context with my technology. So that without an improvisational approach, I felt that I would have less of a physical relationship to the technical instrument. And so by improvising, it allowed me to be present in the technology, but also it allowed me to be present in the sounds of the technology. So physically enacted or physically activated in the sound of the technology, which, as you heard, is largely noise. I am really into noise music, or noise musics, or musics created from noisy things, and have been for most of the time that I've been playing these instruments after my brief run as a lap banjo player, or lap dulcimer player, which was very short-lived, 7 to 8 years old. But yes, I love noisy things. I love those sounds for a lot of different reasons, partially because they are the sounds of every liminal, in-between, marginal unwanted, unexpressed, ill-defined, but somehow really powerful space. And that's what got me into that kind of soundscape. I also really like noise because it also can be a disruption, a protest, a creation of dissonance in which to like sort of fracture or split or move certain ideas, certain spaces. What's that? 10 minutes up? Okay, great. So a lot of how I'm approaching improvisation is to connect deeper to noise as a sound material, and then also to connect deeper to the ways in which my technology works. Let's see. So one thing that actually expresses this kind of improvisational approach is this tape cassette player. I have inside of this tape cassette player a 6-minute looping cassette. So it just goes 6 minutes over. It's constantly like going through in 6-minute chunks. It's like from an old answering machine. And this tape cassette at this point, I've had it in service for maybe, I don't know, like 7 years. And I usually use it in performances to do a couple of things. One is to play back whatever's already on there. The second thing is to create feedback by pressing all the buttons down and using the internal microphone. This one's being very kind and not giving you the super high-pitched feedback, but you can hear it on the cassette because the way to make the feedback is by pressing the record button and feeding back with the microphone. So when I do that in live performances, inevitably some portion of that feedback tone ends up getting recorded on the cassette. In addition to any other musicians or any other sound that's happening in the show that I'm allowing to be played. So somehow this tape cassette became the easiest way for me to document a process of improvisation. So this is basically like somehow both an improvised performance while also being a document of an improvisation while also never being able to remain a document. Because I just keep recording over it over and over and over again. So it's a little bit of like a palimpsestic kind of process of thinking about sound production in this particular way of like writing over, overlapping, or layering. So that continues still to be in production here. Anybody has any of these Radio Shack tape cassette players? I would kindly buy them off of you, because this guy's on his last legs, so he's already splitting. And then I don't know how I don't know what's gonna happen after that. Might just be the end of it. All right, last thing here. I wanted to describe just one different way in which this practice, improvisation, electronics, thinking about technology and one's relationship to technology actually moves into what is, for lack of a better word, a community engaged practice that I do as a teacher, working with very young, usually young students somewhere between 9 and 16. And what I do is I teach them to build electronics. I basically teach them to engage with technology very much in the ways in which I engage with technology. So building electronics, in this case, this is like we're building a contact mic, creating improvisations with those instruments. So we build the mic, then we use them to do musical improvisation. And then in addition to that, we usually also engage Pauline Oliveros' deep listening practices. So all of my educational work is really just a way to formalize the ways in which I relate to my own instruments. Listening, improvisation, and developing intimate relationships to technology. And is that, are we ready to go into the Q&A? Okay, and then this is just my last little quote from George Lewis, who was talking about noise in the book that was called Noise in and As Music, edited by Aaron, let me make sure I say the names, edited by Aaron Einbond and Aaron Cassidy from Huddersfield University Press. This book is available through the Creative Commons license, so you can download it from the Huddersfield Press website, so I recommend it. It's a very lovely book that talks about noise practices, and featured interviews with different musicians, one of which, George Lewis, talks about why he makes noise and what he thinks noise means. And that was something he said in that interview. So that was it. Thanks.
Thanks. So we'll now go into about 10 minutes of Q&A for Bonnie. I have a question ready, but if anyone has a burning question, feel free to go for it. Otherwise, I'll kick it off. Yeah.
Maybe I missed it. How did you start circuit bending, and why were you attracted to pedals at first? Was it you were using your pedals for your dulcimer playing? Or?
Oh, no. The dulcimer playing really did stop when I was like 8 years old.
Oh, okay.
That was like super long in the past. But I was improvising a lot using clavinet, the inside of a clavinet, like almost like a sort of inside piano approach. And then I was also doing hydrophone stuff, and I was just kind of looking for my instrument. And then I moved to Korea in 2003 and lived there for a year when I was doing a Fulbright, and met a bunch of expats, but also met some Korean noise musicians who were making music primarily from just hacking into consumer electronics. So noise from hard drives, noise from CD players, tape cassettes, whatever electronic refuse was available, which is a lot actually. I mean, obviously Eastern Asia has a lot of electronic refuse. So that was kind of how I sort of stumbled upon this approach to playing the pedals. And when I had my first encounter with not this exact instrument, but a slightly modified instrument that was made by a musician, Brian Eubanks from Portland, it completely like locked in for me that this is the instrument, this is the ideas, these are the sounds that I want to make.
Follow-up questions? We have a microphone. If you want to speak quietly, you can amplify your voice. Anyone in the back there? No? Okay. I had a question about, well, you talked about how you have the tape players about to fall apart maybe, and how you go through these cycles of using the devices, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on anything you've done to maintain these devices, right? To like keep them in your favorite states of kind of in between breaking operation. Is that something you think about? Maintenance?
I don't actually do that much maintenance. I use those pedals are very strong, and they've like this one is like slightly needs some work on the battery clip, but really that's the only thing. And this pedal I've probably been using for over a decade, so it still functions quite well, even though I'm kind of like abusing the circuit board. I mean, the idea around these instruments is that most of them were already broken, so they come to me as a recycling, as a certain kind of recycling of consumer electronics. So their lifespan is just whatever their lifespan is. I mean, I do want another one of those tape set players because I've gotten really like attached to using it. Like, I guess that's the interesting thing about these things that you might pick up that are kind of found material or even just repurposed, is that your body becomes accustomed relating to the device in a certain way, and you are a little attached. Like, I'm a little attached to how I can squeeze the buttons on that particular cassette player and how it responds and how gestural, or how like it becomes like a controller. So then I get attached a little bit to the object. But as far as letting them go gently into the night when they're ready, they just let me know. Right? Usually making a sad sound. It's like, I've only had one pedal that got to that state, and that's like in whatever 15, 16 years. It's got to that final space.
How did the children react to this kind of this practice that you're introducing them to? Did they take it up kind of effortlessly and naturally, or were they resistant or inquisitive?
Probably all of those things at the same time, because I think that what I really enjoy doing when I do those workshops, the first most important part is that we actually build it. So there's this whole other part of the creative mind or the practical mind that digs into the actual process of building this thing, and most of them maybe have not soldered before, or they certainly haven't been handed the tools and just said go ahead and learn to solder. And I think something about doing that changes their relationship to the material, like the instrument. And then when they get to the sort of part where they explore the sounds, the structure of the workshop is super open. I want them to feel about the instrument the way that I feel about the instrument, which is I just want to see what it does. So the environment is very conducive to that kind of play. It's like we have a bunch of found objects. Everything is possible. There's not a lot of, we don't even talk about what the sounds are. We just let them come and grab things and then start making noise with it. So yeah, it actually tends to be very natural, and most kids find it very gratifying to just see what comes out of the instruments. And some don't, but that's cool too. It's cool if you're just not into it.
Do the kids take up your affective relation to the objects in the way that you're describing them as being sort of, as part of the stakes, being an emotional?
I would say probably not, because it's really just the first time that they're interacting, but maybe they do. Maybe over time, a lot of them play instruments as well. A lot of the kids we work with are also learning instruments, so they might have different relationships already to instruments. I would say that the thing that I think is part of what I've really worked to develop is actually that emotional relationship. A lot of the sounds that I'm using in my live setup, I have emotional relationships. I use samples that I've recorded from 15 years ago that I use a lot in my setup, and again and again and again, with the purpose of developing intimacy with the sound, because I think it changes it changes my compositional decisions, it changes how I use it. Kind of back to my manifesto, I do believe in what I would call a sonic self or a sonic subjectivity, and that this is a certain kind of ecosystem that is very much about sonically being. And so I try to develop those relationships with sounds to make that sonic presence of it. Was there
Yeah.
I had a question about, and I came late to the talk. I'm sorry about that. The segues are bad. But I was wondering, I was really struck by this image of a body kind of in a field of static. And when you move or you have a kind of physical connection to that static or that sonic soundscape with that field. And I was wondering if, speaking of a sonic subject, if there's also maybe a sonic object, or that if when you consider your body as part of this soundscape, you can also think of your body as a technology that's being conjoined with other devices that share the conductivity of electricity and stuff.
That was the context of what?
The conductivity of electricity, making minute changes and kind of feeling like you're not a subject anymore. Or
yes, I think that was sort of what I was talking about in the beginning with the sort of tutor relationship to the instrument. Always assuming that this is a thing that has that we're going to have a conversation, and that when I put my hands inside of it, it's like an engagement or an entanglement that is just as much about what it could express as an object or a sound object, both the object, but then also the sounds it makes, and then myself as a sounding or sort of subjective sort of relationship to the object. So yeah, I very much think about that a lot, and I think that's part of this process that I'm talking about, this intimacy with sound, by maintaining a certain kind of I don't even know what to, it's an expressive autonomy or something. This has an expressive autonomy, I have an expressive autonomy, and there's a certain kind of conversation and sort of ecosystem between the person and the musical object, and then the sounds that both of those things might make.
I guess I wonder, in the moment of performance, though, do those roles switch? Like, is it possible for a musical sonic subject to become an object and the object to become a subject?
Yes, if the instruments do what they want, which they often do. There's at least, I mean, I've been playing these instruments for a while, and there are areas that I know, but they're only, it's like knowing a place through reading about it on Wikipedia and not going there. So like it always will be different once you're there, and there will always be parameters that you can't totally control. I mean, electronics always have thresholds for failure, and this pedal that I use more like a real pedal has a really vast range of discrepancy. Like sometimes I don't know what, I mean, sometimes I just turn the volume up and see what it's doing, and then I take off from a different direction.
Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah,
to cut this off, but give Bonnie another round of applause.